This week on Motor Week, Ken Gibson goes out and thrashes the new Nissan Skyline. And it's Nissan's all-round as I get behind the wheel of the Almera. And Phil Sayer goes cruising in the Alfa 145.
Now this has to be the ideal parking spot for a Nissan Skyline, a helicopter pad. Because this is as near as you're going to get to being airborne on four wheels. The Skyline is an absolute flying machine. This car is a petrol head's dream. It's macho with a big capital M. Everywhere you look on it, it's got huge spoilers, side sills, the wheel arches are massive, but then a need to be. We're talking about 18-inch wheels here. It's got Brembo brakes on it. When you put the foot on those, it's like dropping an anchor. Everywhere it looks muscle. It looks as if it's powerful and dangerous. And then you finally come back to the old aeronautical touch, this huge rear spoiler that looks as if it could fit very happily onto the back of a Boeing 747. But actually it's rather practical because this mechanism here helps keep the stability down and actually keep you back on the ground. Here we've got about 5 or 6 horses. Inside of here we've got 277 horses. Sadly, no car is perfect, and if this wonderful Nissan has one failing, it's the interior. It doesn't feel or look like a 54 grand car. A lot of it is standard stock. The only difference is this Nintendo-like machine with all of the information on the screen. That said, the seats are wonderfully comfortable. They're very good in the back as well, so you can actually put the fear of God up to 3 people in one go. But in many ways, I'd forgive Nissan anything for this car, and it's quite livable with, and it's very practical. Floor the accelerator in this machine, and it's like lift-off at Cape Canaveral. It's absolutely superb. Mind you, it's no bloody surprise, really. 0 to 60 takes just 4.5 seconds. 0 to 100 will take you 10.5 if you really put your foot down. And that is just amazing performance. It's got more technology underneath here than you've got in your average computer center. There's multi-link suspension, front and back. There's a computer-controlled 4-wheel drive system that controls the car so well that, to be honest, you're not quite sure whether the computer's driving the car or you're driving it. The great news is, though, you feel absolutely wonderful. Driving this, I feel as if I'm Michael Schumacher. Cornering is like going around on rails. But amazingly, you really have to concentrate. This is about as near as you can get to driving a rally car. The ride is rock hard. You feel every bump as you go along the road, but it just adds to the adrenaline rush. It is just such a buzz. This is untrue. I feel like some young kid again. It is just sensational. This is the fastest drive I have ever had in my life. Top speed's limited to 155 miles an hour, which is actually probably a good idea, because you can lose your license in this car very easily just going from 0 to 100. Whatever your favorite ride in a theme park has been, forget about it, because the Skyline gives you your very own everyday theme park. After a burst in this, you'll never ever want to go to Blackpool or Alton Towers again. Supercar jungle, there's an all-new king, and that's the Nissan GTi. Forget all about your Ferraris, your Porsches. They're as common as muck, and when it comes to sheer speed and brute force, this big baby will leave them standing.
something that's very easily done. It's just a little white lie, no big deal, and we've all done it. Somebody asks you what you drive and you just say a GTI. You lead them to believe that it's a VW, a Peugeot or some other hot hatch. Why? Because you know they're trying to weigh you up, and they may not have quite the same opinion if they discover it's a Nissan Almera GTi. The Almera GTi was launched at the Geneva Motor Show in March '98 and has since been refreshed with some interior and exterior styling enhancements. The Nissan is designed to appeal to the young, adventurous driver, so it's built to compete with the market leaders, cars like VW's Golf GTi and the Peugeot 306 XSI. Still, we shouldn't be too hard on the Nissan because it is a very tidy little car, and you shouldn't be embarrassed if you choose to drive one. Just don't expect people to want a second look at it. Even with its deep integrated bumpers, the rally-inspired skirts on the side and the sporty spoiler at the rear, I don't think anybody will take your handbrake turns seriously. Still, it is supposed to be a sporty car, and who am I to argue with the designers? I just can't imagine you getting white-knuckle ride performance out of it. Still, I'm prepared to give it a chance. Well, I've got to admit that straight away you slip into these contoured sporting seats that also have lumbar and pelvic support, which isn't bad at all. And there does seem to be plenty of room here in the cabin, but I'm afraid that that's down to the rather long and unsporting nature of its design. As for the interior trim, well, I'm not too keen. Far too much black, as usual in cars like this. But there is a generous amount of storage space, plenty of little cubby holes for you to keep all your junk in. The other stuff, such as this 4-spoke steering wheel, driver's airbag, electric door mirrors and electric front window, is pretty much what you get in most types of GTI. But you do get a few nice extras as standard. White instrument dials, air conditioning, electric sunroof and a 6-speaker CD player. And that's pretty good going. And speaking of going some, it must be said that the Almera can go some too, if you wanted to. This is the 2-litre 4-cylinder 16-valve engine. It produces 143 brake horsepower and has a top speed of 131 miles per hour. 0 to 60 will take you just over 6 seconds, which means that it keeps up very nicely with the Golf GTIs and the Peugeots of this world. The handling, though, is one area for concern. At low speeds, it corners as if it's on rails, but then again, I can't think of many cars that don't at low speeds. And remember, this is a GTI, we should be expecting performance and superb handling. The problem is, once you get up to high speed, you really feel as if you could be driving on gravel, not the good old tarmac. It makes the Nissan definitely a candidate for traction control. Behind the wheel, this isn't a bad ride at all. In fact, around town it feels very agile. It's great for nipping in and out of traffic. And that's all down to the multi-link beam rear suspension, which improves the car's handling balance. Nissan are very hot on safety, and the GTI features a 4-track anti-lock brake system as standard, which monitors each wheel individually, applies the brakes when it's needed. It's supposed to work as soon as the car gets above 6 miles per hour. Now, I don't know about all that, but I reckon the brakes work just fine. You can get yourself one of these for £16,600 on the road, which is cheaper than both the Golf and the Peugeot. However, a Golf GTI, this ain't. So if you want a bit more from your hot hatch, then I'm afraid you're going to have to look elsewhere. But if you want a sporty little hatchback that's crammed full of extras at a very reasonable price, then you're going to have to face up to the fact that you could possibly drive a Nissan. But never mind, you can always just tell people that you drive a GTI. Who's to know?
You may recently have seen me cruising around the streets of Paris, enjoying myself immensely in this, the new Venturi Atlantique. New because of its engine, mid-mounted 3-litre V6 24-valve unit. And this week, I'm driving this. The reason is, even though this might be a bus designed for cruising the ankle-biters to school of a morning, it shares something with this, the Venturi Atlantique, the world's only French supercar, and you will not believe what it shares. It's the engine. The same V6 unit, albeit without the turbos, is found in here. Only the French. Given the size of this thing and the nature of French driving, I thought it prudent to escape the madness of Paris and enjoy the peace and quiet at the Bois de Boulogne. The Grand Espace V6. There's not actually a lot to distinguish it from any other Espace RXE outside, apart from one thing. And that's this, a tiny little V6 24-valve badge. This is the first time that the Grand Espace has been available with any petrol engine. Only going to be available in the RXE, the top trim level of any Espace, which means it comes with an awful lot of equipment. In here we've got air conditioning with separate controls for driver and front passenger. There's a remote control for the stereo mounted at the steering wheel. The seats are on Renault's unique rail system, which means they're pretty much infinitely adjustable between their two fixed points, which makes for an incredible amount of flexibility. If we're talking about a new engine, there's no point sitting around looking at it, we've got to try it. The next generation Espace was first introduced to the UK about a year ago. It's only now do we get the multi-valve V6. It's a joint development between Renault and Peugeot. The same engine can be found in the RTi V6 Laguna, the top-of-the-range, top-spec luxury Laguna with a bit of oomph. Okay, it's the same engine, but there's no twin turbos, so it's not 300 brake horsepower, but you're still talking about 190 brake horsepower. This is the Grand Espace, so it's the slightly lengthened version. That means you've got room for 7 people, plus all of their luggage in the back. And even then, there's still a monumental amount of power. It raises quite a lot of eyebrows, leaping away from the traffic lights, leaving in your wake various hot hatches and frustrated, spotted little Herberts, because they really did not expect something as big as a house to leap away from them at quite such speed. This is for the kind of guy who's got a family that he loves, but likes occasionally at the weekend to nip out to the country, put his foot down and raise a smile. That 194 bhp is put to the front wheels through this 4-speed automatic gearbox with this American-style dashboard-mounted lever. I'm not a big fan of the lever, but the gearbox is fine. It might seem like total madness to put such an engine in such a vehicle, coming from a manufacturer that actually managed to put a V10 F1 engine into one of these things. It isn't that surprising in the end. The Espace really is big in every direction. It's vast in size. It offers enormous amounts of practicality and versatility thanks to its flexible interior. And now it's got a big engine, which means it's big fun to drive as well. Basically, we've got a plastic body on a galvanised chassis, and a large part of the underside comes from the Laguna. So all that power actually does suit the big bus. In fact, it makes for relaxed motorway cruising with all the family on board and all their luggage as well. It's not available in the UK with the V6 until March, so there is no price yet. And don't expect it to be cheap when there is a price. Renault make no secret of the fact that the Espace is an expensive MPV. And the new V6 24-valve RXE is definitely their new flagship.
Coming up in part 2, Phil Sayer gets a drive in the Alfa 145.
Alfa Romeo have been very much in the news recently, and quite right too. The 156 is getting rave reviews. It's taken on the very best that BMW can offer and has sure given it a run for its money. Above that in the range, the 166, which has plenty of fans too. And if you've got loads of money and you only need 2 seats, then spend it on a GTV coupe or the very desirable Spider convertible equivalent. Now, with all that stuff going on, I guess a lot of people have forgotten about the baby of the range. Here it is, the 145. There's a booted version with a couple of extra doors too, the 146, essentially the same car. I think the 145 looks pretty indeed, and this one is the Cloverleaf, which means it's got the 2-litre engine, twin spark, too many spark plugs, and it goes like stink. That basically is what Cloverleaf means in Alfa speak. Are they right? Let's find out. Any car with sporting ambitions has got 2 key ingredients. A great engine, okay, full marks there, a tick in the box. This engine is fantastic. Needs to be revved fairly hard to get the best out of it. There's not a lot of torque if you don't rev the thing. But the suspension is the other key component. Now, suspension and ride is always going to be a compromise between how well it holds the road and how comfortable it is. And I think they've actually got the sums a little bit wrong. It's too soft, and that means that it just doesn't hold on quite as well as it might do around the corners and doesn't actually feel like a sports car. It's too soft. It's almost too comfortable. Now, would you actually want to own one? What's for and against? Well, perhaps the big for is the fact that it is a great little package. It's an enjoyable car overall and very, very capable. However, against it is towering depreciation, like virtually all Italian cars in this country suffer from. Also, the fuel economy isn't anything to write home about. It likes a drink, this vehicle. And the JD Power Reliability Survey put this car a rather sad 82nd. Now, everybody that was questioned praised its performance. The whole package, they said, was pretty right. But niggling electrical faults, minor paintwork blemishes and problems, all that kind of stuff that other manufacturers, notably the Germans and, fair play, the Brits, do seem to have sorted out now. The Italians apparently have still got some way to go on that. For my money, this is one very good-looking hatchback car. That grille is a kind of a miniaturized version of the approach of styling that you'll see on the bigger Alfa Romeos. And when we look under the bonnet, well, what do you expect to find? It's not exactly a Morris Minor in there, is it? Beautiful-looking Alfa Romeo twin-spark engine, writ large. That'll certainly impress the neighbours when you're checking the oil. And by the way, good access for all the things that you need to have access to, like checking the oil and the water, etc. As you move around the car, the big disappointment for me is these alloy wheels. Now, I really think they could have done better. It's like a sort of a 5-hole version of the old XR3i wheels from the days of our youth. This side treatment is nice with the swept up line here in the door, and these doors are huge. That's great for access. It does, however, mean that this B-pillar is a fair way back, and that means a big stretch over your shoulder to get the seat belt, but we have to compromise, I guess. These side windows, just the overall approach of that, I think, is interesting. These open, by the way, for a bit of extra ventilation. But it's when you come round to the back of this vehicle that I think the stylist really has earned his money. With that unusual and quite brave sort of V approach there, the spoiler on the top says, "I mean business," so does the Boy Racer exhaust, and above all, so does the Cloverleaf badge in conjunction with the Alfa Romeo badge. This car says, "I'm not playing around here." The interior is in many ways pretty much what you'd expect from a car with sporting pretensions. Lots of black and red piping on everything. The seating position is peculiar, it has to be said. I always figure with a sporty car you need to be well back from the wheel, legs nice and straight, but this seat doesn't lend itself to that. Although it cuddles you here nicely at the sides, there's a high front lip. Now what that means is that you have to be quite close to the pedals with your legs almost at a right angle here. Okay? That's fine, except that Alfa Romeo then very thoughtfully give you a little handle to pull at the side, which will take this seat even higher. Have I disappeared yet? Now, who on earth needs to be that high in a car? I certainly don't, that's for sure. Now, it does give a lot of extra legroom in the back if this seat is further forward, and maybe that is the point of the exercise. Rear legroom, by the way, is quite generous. This is what I don't like. Not enough bells and whistles on the dashboard. The radio is in completely the wrong position because it's very fiddly anyway, and it shouldn't be down there. It needs to be up here. But above all of this plastic just seems a little bit too cheap and cheerful for me. The switch gear is a little bit on the flimsy side, and it works today, but will it work next year? Who knows? But really, this ventilation system here, I think they need a good rethink on that one. So, the Alfa Romeo 145 2-litre Cloverleaf, on-the-road price $16,742. Now that sets it up against the BMW 318 Ti Compact, which will cost you around 50 quid more, and for another 100 you can have the Audi A3 1.6 Sport. A little below it, 20 quid less, the Nissan Primera 2-litre SLX. Oh, and by the way, if you really want to spend serious money on an Alfa, how about the new Alfa GTV 6-speed 3-litre? A mere £30,000 and 65 pence. That 2-litre engine pumps out 155 brake horsepower, enough to take the Cloverleaf from 0 to 60 in 7.8 seconds, which is pretty seriously quick. There's a price to pay though, the fuel consumption a mere 32.1 mpg. That's not terribly good, and the insurance is Group 14. Top speed, 131 miles per hour. If you really want an Alfa Romeo, my recommendation would be save up your money and get one of this car's bigger brothers. Because, in a sense, it's a victim of its own success at the moment, Alfa Romeo, and because of that, this car really doesn't match up to the rest of the range. Now that said, that doesn't mean it's a bad car. It isn't, it's a very good car. And to be honest with you, I have thoroughly enjoyed driving it. In fact, I think I'll do a bit more of that.
One of the surprises Land Rover unveiled at the Discovery launch was the new Storm Diesel engine. It's not related to any BMW unit. The Storm was in the early stages of development when the German firm took over. Originally planned as part of a modular group of 4, 5 and 6 cylinder units, the Discovery gets the 2.5-litre straight 5, producing 136 bhp, but more importantly, a maximum torque of 232 pound-foot. And a large proportion of that torque comes very low down in the rev range. In order to achieve the specific requirements of Land Rover's heavy off-roader and still meet future emissions requirements, the engineers needed to turn to high-pressure direct injection. The engineers chose to adopt electronic unit injectors, or EUI. This system had a proven track record in large diesels fitted to trucks, reducing emissions whilst increasing economy. One of the keys to good diesel emissions is high-pressure fuel injection. EUI uses an individual camshaft-driven plunger pump for each cylinder's injector. This allows up to 22,000 psi to be generated, compared to about half that for a standard direct high-pressure injection system. And because the pressure is only contained for a short period within the injector, there's plenty of potential to increase the pressure further. Common rail systems, which are becoming the vogue in diesel design, are limited in the pressure they can contend with because of the connections and distribution pipes needed for them to operate. Land Rover proudly claim that the new unit exceeds even future emissions requirements without needing a catalyst. They also say that there's room for even greater results in future as the TD5 is developed further.
On next week's show, we take a look at the new MGF, and Phil gets a drive in the Daewoo Corando.